Hello, my name is Chloe Bruce. I've been running a YouTube channel now for a good 4 or 5 months, and I've been talking about many things to do with the United Kingdom, the political life, the socioeconomic life, and various issues surrounding the health services here. I've discussed how I was diagnosed with schizophrenia in my late 20s, a good 2.5 decades ago, and how I later was diagnosed with epilepsy after suffering a grand mal seizure. I've talked about stigma and mental health attitudes in the United Kingdom in particular, but have placed this in the context of emerging fascism and many fascist elements, including in the top levels of government, in my opinion. If you want to see more about this, please do see some of my early YouTube channels, and I hope that the title in itself of the video will help you guide you to the right part. But in other parts of this channel, I've discussed my psychotic symptoms, the symptoms leading up to my diagnosis of schizophrenia, how I've worked with this schizophrenia for the most part until several years ago, a good 10 years ago. I've been now unemployed about 10 years. As a result of these health problems, and luckily my seizures are now very under control even without medication. Anyway, you may remember, if you've seen earlier videos, I may introduce myself. I was a journalist for some years and also studied for a doctorate in Russian natural gas politics. I'm a specialist and a postgraduate specialist in Russian natural gas politics and Russian politics and history overall. And this has been really a fixed fascination of mine for many years, ever since I was given the opportunity to study Russian language at school from the age of 14. And I was able to go on exchange under communism to the then Leningrad, now St. Petersburg. And I've never really given up my love for this country and for Russia, that is, and the wonderful culture in language and literature and music that you can find there, and historically also. Now, I've talked about some of my insights into Russian natural gas. Although I'm not studying or researching at the moment, I've been trying to offer some insight into the current situation, the energy crisis that's across Europe and even in Britain, despite being an energy economy ourselves. We've suffered energy price inflation and inflation overall. And this is put down in many medias to the current war in Ukraine and Russia, the conflict between the pair of them. And this is the impact, the concomitant impact on our energy prices here. This is because I can point out that Russia for a long while had and has been the main source of natural gas for the EU. Now, today I thought I'd just say a brief word about the BRICS summit, the recent BRICS summit here in October still. Yes, we're still in October, so the BRICS summit that's just taken place in Kazan. And I was looking at my area, which is Putin, but I was looking out to Putin and Russia, but I was looking out, he was there, but I was looking out for anything new on the energy, given how much debate there is and how much community has concerned itself with what it calls energy blackmail. 1 second. Hello, yes, sorry for that brief interruption. I had to answer the door about something. Anyway, so I've discussed parts of this, these energy attitudes of Europe's also. And as such, I'm looking at some of the energy news emanating from this BRICS conference. I'll read a short discussion of my insights and some of the news. So the UK news channels focused primarily on overtly military problems in their coverage of the BRICS summit. Summit part where Putin spoke, so the part of the summit where Putin was speaking. I should like to focus on the energy news of the conference, held late October, that is this month, and which is of course not unrelated to war, and which shows continuing tensions between Russia and Europe. Putin and Turkey discussed their commitment, Putin and Turkey at the conference, at the summit, discussed their commitment to the long-mooted Turkish natural gas hub that would receive natural gas, not just from Russia, but I surmise this is not said, but I surmise also possibly natural gas from Azerbaijan, which has some decent gas reserves of its own. According to the press releases on the Kremlin website about the BRICS summit, many available in English, last year, about some 20.5 BCM of natural gas flowed through the Blue Stream and Turkish Stream pipelines from Russia to Turkey. And they now want, because of these infrastructure in place, a hub seems desirable, presumably by both sides. This discussion relates to the Ukraine-Russia conflict, as it may be a sign that Russia will permanently give up on Ukraine as a transit route for Russian natural gas to Europe. It had for many years been a main transit route for the Russian natural gas to Europe, which is why it has repercussions for Europe also, even and now with the conflict, they have their own energy concerns. So it seems plausible that despite the conflict and EU sanctions on Russia, that it is still transporting. So I said this is a transit Ukraine, and it has a transit pipeline, a trunk line, that has delivered vast quantities of Russian natural gas to Europe. And any instability, any interruptions on this pipeline could have some effect on Europe. And Turkey would be an alternative. It already is an alternative transit route. It had shared transit status with Ukraine for Russian gas, but it would be an alternative, which I'll come to. So it seems plausible that despite the conflict and the EU sanction Russia, that Ukraine is still, despite these conflicts, despite Europe sanctioning Russia, Ukraine is still transporting through its territory some Russian natural gas. And this, of course, isn't any kind of criticism. I'm talking about pragmatic decision making. So I saw, related to this, the reason I've been speculating for a while whether gas was still running through Ukrainian transit. Russian natural gas was, despite all this hideous bloody conflict, natural gas is nevertheless, I was wondering if the transit flows are still there. But interestingly, researching recently the BRICS summit and related issues, I saw on the website of the Moldovan Energy Ministry, on their website of the Moldovan Energy Ministry, concerns earlier this month that their shipments to the Transnistria region, that is Russian natural gas shipments to the Transnistria region of Moldova proper, Transnistria, might concerns about these shipments. And I'll come to this, but just to give you some background, this is a territory of this area. Transnistria has had secessionist aspirations to leave Moldova and become part of Russia. It's one of those disputed areas that has occurred since the fall of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s. And this energy ministry suggested that, as such, that it is still getting Russian natural gas to this day, or to the point of this press release in early October this year, that it has been receiving Russian gas through the Ukrainian transit. And it should be noted that Russia supplying the region could also be for humanitarian reasons, even though it's not serving Moldova proper. As far as I can see, it is according to the Moldovan Energy Ministry, still supplying natural gas to the once and maybe still secessionist region of Transnistria for humanitarian reasons, as there is many reasons maybe, but there is a significant number of Russians living there, or had long ago living there, I mean, who have lived for a very long while on that territory. And according to Moldovan's energy ministry, this particular Ukraine-Russia transit agreement, that is the one going via Ukraine to Moldova, bear in mind there's little else in the way of a stable route to get gas to Moldova from Russia. It just historically does and still does go via Ukraine and then to the Transnistria part. And according to Moldova's energy ministry, this particular Ukraine-Russia transit agreement, the Ukraine-Russia transit agreement affecting Transnistria, is due to expire on January the 1st, 2025, any minute now. Excuse me. And the country has to consider higher prices for Transnistria were a renewal of this transit agreement between Russia and Ukraine not to be agreed. In other words, when there's a conflict or a gas dispute, other countries do and can be affected, and or other areas, and I'll just continue. I hope it will become clear. So Moldova shows. So Moldova, for its part, shows pricing pragmatism as it lays out on its website its strategy for this eventuality. It's a pessimistic scenario that it feels might occur, given the impending expiring of this transit contract. So note how it is, in other words, it relies on Ukrainian transit. Note how it is incomplete maths, says Putin at BRICS. Not necessarily this transit agreement, but on the EU's part. He is criticising, I'm saying that Moldova shows pricing pragmatism, acknowledging that this end of the transit contract with the details, knowing the details, and it explains that when this transit contract expires, for various reasons, they may be faced with high prices for natural gas in Transnistria. And the plan is to get more gas from the European Union and various other strategies. But it's not easy, and it's obviously the proximity of markets matter in terms of pricing, and also where the gas comes from Europe. Originally, it won't be particularly EU gas, given they have very little in the way of indigenous reserves. Where will it come from? The US might be it's mooted, and of course some Russian gas may be re-exported, and nevertheless, at least Moldova probably doesn't have to deal with Russia at that point. It's dealing with the EU, even if it's the EU that's buying Russian gas that it then resells to Moldova in some kind of circuitous route. And yet, says Putin, note how this is incomplete maths, he says at BRICS. It is the incomplete maths of the EU energy strategy in the face, in my view, of Moldovan pragmatism, and I should imagine I'd also like to say Ukraine shows great pragmatism at this moment if it is keeping the transit lines alive. At the end of the day, it gets money for the rent of the transit of its lines. And says Putin, this is incomplete maths with the EU that he's bothered by in his EU energy relationships. He cites Africa as needing hydrocarbons for now. And the shift to renewables clearly contains many aspects and needs, if you consider the shift to renewables, this clearly contains many aspects and depends on technology being readily available. And this is, he's saying, as far as I can, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but if the EU is pressuring Africa and they're pushed into getting renewables, this is maybe not realistic for Africa for the time being, because it's difficult to get the technology, for example, and that kind of thing. He's just trying to, I think, show part of this story is he doesn't feel as though they're really calculating, but I would put that a step further and say, are they calculating their own sanctions? Because even in Britain, with an energy economy, we have food inflation and various inflations related to the higher energy prices from the sanctions. And historically, sanctions often discussed by academics as having very little real impact on any kind of conflict or regime change. And as such, without the details, I'll come to this, I sort of share his view that a bit more detail, a bit more technicality, a bit more sum adding up, a bit more graphs to show what's happening, detailed graphs, and what happens globally and with renewables and what's happening with renewables would be desirable as a very concrete discussion, not just with the media, but politicians throughout the European bloc, European area. So where is supply security in all this? Clearly, Russia may feel that using a Turkish natural gas hub will improve security, as it can rely less on existing transit routes that can create political disputes as well as economic ones. But the advantage for the EU of this transit hub could be a choice also of more LNG and gas, and also natural gas from Azerbaijan, as well as Russian gas to the hub. And circumstances permitting, the price of natural gas sold to Europe could potentially decrease. And this is something desirable also for Russia, as it wants its natural gas to be competitive. And as I was hinting at earlier, I'm concerned about low levels of pragmatism when it comes to the EU and the UK energy calculations. That's why the title of this is Summit, the BRICS Summit, and the Summit added up for us today for a change. It's not necessarily the same situation that Moldova finds itself in. Moldova has had a dispute with Russia that goes back way longer, but the focus on Putin's personality by elements in the EU and Britain, and I hear British politicians doing this very thing, and with little detail of why the elections, for example, have been undemocratic. They say this is a dictatorship, undemocratic, and with little clear cases of coercion, especially natural gas coercion specifically to the EU. I'm the one who wrote the doctorate on coercion within the CIS, the Commonwealth of Independent States. I was saying that there's an element at times of coercion by Russia when it comes to natural gas supplies. But I don't hear, I gave many examples, hundreds of examples of this. I haven't heard a single example of gas coercion. I'm not saying it's not true, I literally just haven't heard a single example from any element, not the media in the UK, nor anywhere, of this gas coercion that they're so worried and hot under the collar about. And as a result of this big heated discussion with a focus on personality and little economic pragmatism, I see that there is too much speculation about what is going on, in fact, and in my view this is creating a kind of sensationalist news in the United Kingdom from ill-qualified reporters. I have spoken in earlier videos on my YouTube channel of how Russia may be close, may choose to impose, perhaps this winter even, in a cold winter especially, sanctions on the European Union by restricting its natural gas exports to Europe. I don't say a full cessation of supplies, although it's not completely impossible depending on events. It is unclear whether the previous bilateral take-or-pay contracts that have existed in Europe between individual countries and Russia for natural gas supplies have changed, either because they have expired already, these long-term take-or-pay contracts, or because they're about to expire. And it may be that these, I am only speculating, but I know that these were had a set period, it wasn't indefinite. Have the contracts ended, these long-term take-or-pay contracts and the pricing agreements within them, in favour of long-term contracts? Have they now become short-term contracts, more flexible, and for Russia, more flexible and in useful ways, replacing these long-term obligations by Russia to supply the EU? I think what I'm saying is it's difficult to extract yourself from a historical contract, but have they expired? And what are the new contracts? Do they allow a get-out clause? And are they due to expire? Are they 1 year, the new contracts, 2 years? When they end, then what's going to happen? Moldova is discussing this openly. What happens when this transit agreement, unwittingly, to them, not really their fault to say the least, expires? They're openly and transparently looking at these scenarios, and they give details of what will happen if it does, what might happen if it doesn't, and where are details? When energy economy? Why can't the government give details of our energy situation a bit more clearly, instead of using umbrella words like Great British Energy? Anyway. It is not, for me, that Russia has now got new markets, although Africa and, say, Latin America could offer some new demand for its natural gas exports, in place instead of, say, some of these European exports it currently has. If Europe does, in a positive sense, and for everyone, get more renewables at a good cost, then it might free up Russian natural gas to go to, if it's out of these contracts, go to, say, some of the developing countries that aren't going to be under the pressure of ending their, aiming for very low emissions and very low fossil fuel usage by the early 2030s. They have a different deadline, I understand. And Latin America, I'm not sure, but they might present some new markets. But nevertheless, this is not entirely what I'm saying. that this would present new demand for natural gas. I'm not sure which contracts or discussions are happening with these particular regions. I should be very interested to know the energy dynamic between the African continent and Russia and the Russian energy producers and suppliers. It would be actually not really just because they have new markets, it would be a consequence of political circumstances and animosities rather than, in my view, a purely commercial decision. And food for thought, I'd say, given our food price inflation and energy inflation. And I say I've got my light on just so I could read. I hardly ever put it on because of the high energy prices, but and moral reasons, I suppose, for the climate, but I had to read my own handwriting. I hope this was interesting. Do let me know if you need anything clarified in the comments. I'm thrilled with everyone watching and thrilled that you've taken time to watch my videos, those who have, and I hope for any new viewers that you will be pleased to see some of my earlier videos where I discussed the diagnosis of schizophrenia, the epilepsy, and my life at the University of Vienna where I studied my doctorate for a while. Thank you for listening today and have a great time.